Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for attending. We're excited you're here, and we're really excited that David Waterman with the search agency is here as well. First, a couple of announcements, and then we'll get right over to David, who's going to teach us about content marketing, something that I'm passionate about, and really is the new SEO and sort of the, in my opinion, the future of in many ways, online marketing as a whole. So first, a couple of announcements. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's webinar, so if you have questions, please type them into the little question bar on your GoToWebinar screen. I will then read those to David at the end of the webinar, and he can address those. And I've said this before, but the question and answer time is extremely valuable, and so please ask questions about content marketing at the conclusion of the webinar. That's first. Second, just to give you a little bit of background on the webinar series and Log My Calls generally. So Log My Calls is a call tracking and call analytics solution. So it's used by agencies all over the country, all over North America, the U.S. and Canada, to track which keywords, which PPC ads and campaigns, and which ad copy, but even organic keywords can generate phone calls and which don't. It also is used by a lot of traditional agencies to determine which campaigns are producing calls. It's also used by businesses large and small to track their marketing ROI. So it's we view it as an essential tool to really close the loop on marketing return on investment calculations. We started this webinar series several months ago, 8 or 9 months ago, and we've been doing 1 or 2 webinars a week since then. And it's been a really great tool for our audience to learn more about marketing subjects from experts. And David is one such expert. So with that, I will introduce David and then turn it over to him. So David Waterman, he's the Director of SEO at the search agency. He'll tell you a little bit more about the agency. They're located in Los Angeles. He manages all SEO efforts for a variety of clients, large and small. He's been in the SEO space and has been very well known in the SEO space for several years now. He works a lot on content optimization, on website organization as well. And this is an interesting element of his bio, I think. In his spare time, he enjoys going to garage sales and swap meets in search of vintage and collectible items. So that's fantastic, by the way. I think there's many a diamond in the rough at a garage sale. So with that, David, we'll turn it over to you, sir.
No, thank you, Rich McKay. Yeah, that is definitely my hobby. I do like to, exactly like you said, look for those diamonds in the rough, and garage sales are definitely those locations where you can, you know, find a treasure for maybe a quarter. So yeah, it's an interesting side note there. So welcome everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about content marketing. Like McKay said, is really kind of crucial to the new way of SEO. I've been in the SEO industry for quite some time, so I've definitely seen the highs, the lows, and kind of what it is has come to be today. So we'll talk a little bit about how kind of how content marketing has really become kind of crucial to the element of SEO for the most part. Like I said, I work for the search agency. The search agency is based in Los Angeles, and we're basically a search marketing agency. We provide services on the kind of PPC side as well as the SEO side, display, do a little bit of everything. And work, like I said, in a lot of different types of clients, small, large, new websites, old websites. So we're definitely seeing a lot, and every recommendation is completely different from the previous, and of course what the next one will be. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let's jump right into it. So I know a lot of you have probably heard about content marketing and really just almost see it as kind of like a buzzword that's out there today. But really, if you want to take a look and see what the definition of content marketing, and then this course is just taken from Wikipedia, it's basically kind of involving any kind of marketing that is involving creation or sharing of media in an effort to acquire customers. And it can include a variety of different types of content, including kind of video, just general news, white papers, infographics, photos, Q&As. It can take a lot of different forms from a traditional sense of content marketing. Now, I think the reason why a lot of us are here today is because we were trying to see how content marketing really fits in the online space, specifically around how to acquire new customers, but also how to appease Google and make sure that when you do create content, it's in a way that Google's going to like. Here's, of course, Wikipedia's definition of Google Panda, which really did start to change the way people kind of looked at content creation on the web. And really, as many of you probably know, Panda was really aimed at targeting those sites that had basically low quality content or thin content, and reduce the rankings that they currently had before. It was kind of somewhat easy, or there was definitely kind of a way to game the system, which resulted in a lot of low-quality content and overall low-quality websites being generated. That with Google Pandas actually has helped to kind of bring back the creativity and the honesty to content creation, which is fantastic. I mean, I kind of started off my career wanting to be a copywriter, and kind of got stuck in this whole SEO world where it was really a lot of kind of volume-based content versus kind of focusing on the quality. So it was a little bit awkward for me at first in terms of like, well, through my schooling and education, it's really quality is what matters most. Fortunately, a couple of years ago, Google really didn't enforce that too much because it was easy to game. But now the game is changed completely, and really quality is of the utmost importance, and that's definitely one thing to keep in mind when you're kind of thinking about content marketing. So really, the way I see it is you want to combine both definitions. You want to take the traditional sense of content marketing in terms of leveraging kind of media, content-based media to acquire new audience members, new customers, but you also want to keep in mind that, like, okay, it's really not just you're kind of appeasing two different audiences, of course, your end user, but also the search engines. So you want to make sure that you kind of have a combination of both great content that is, up to par with the search engines. You don't want to just kind of start churning out all this content just because you think you can get audience members that way. You want to kind of think of both. Now, the other thing you want to kind of keep in mind is that really the execution of content marketing, it varies greatly depending on your industry, depending on your business. So just because you see a lot of people creating a lot of videos or a lot of infographics, it may not make sense necessarily for you in particular to create videos and infographics. It also kind of comes down to what resources you have, what can you create quickly. There's a lot of different things you can do, but you want to kind of get a sense of what might make sense for you and your industry, and ultimately what your end user or your target market is really looking to see. How do they tend to want to digest content? Is it more video? Is it more articles? Is it infographic, white papers? So it's going to vary greatly depending on your industry and exactly who your audience is. But I think the one thing to also keep in mind is, regardless of the industry, regardless of the exact type of content you plan on writing, it really does rely on a plan. I always like to say legitimacy relies on a plan. You don't want to just say, okay, great, I hear this thing called content marketing. I know Google likes to see a lot of fresh content. I'm just going to start writing content. You definitely want to say, okay, well, what's the plan? How am I going to do this? How does it mix into my existing marketing plan? How do I leverage all the different elements I have, from kind of social marketing to email to just good old PPC, to make an actual content marketing plan that has goals, that makes sense, that has consistency and longevity. So there is a specific plan that I recommend when it comes to content marketing. And a couple different elements you should keep in mind, and really make sure that you check those boxes before you even kind of start to write piece one of your content. And there's 6 specific points here when it comes to your plan, and I break them out in these. I want to say the first one you definitely want to make sure is to think beyond the blog. I'll talk a little bit more what I mean when I say that. You also want to identify your content concept. You want to give your content a home, and of course call out the conversion path, and then optimize. Optimization is still a piece of it all, and then of course finally promote. So I'll go into a little bit of detail of exactly what each one of these mean. All right, think beyond the blog. This is kind of my own little kind of slogan I like to use, because so many people I talk to is like, oh shoot, I need to create a blog. Well, to me that doesn't mean anything. You haven't said anything if you've said I need to create a blog. You need to think much larger and take a couple steps back and figure, okay, hold on a second here. Why do you want to create a blog? Is it because you want to create content? Well, what's the objective of creating content? Is it to get more followers from a social media perspective? Are you trying to get more leads? Is it more sales? What's really the objective of creating this content? Who is your target audience? Hopefully by this point you have an idea of who your target audience actually is, but maybe you don't in terms of who your online audience is and who may actually want to read this content or feel they have there's a need to get this kind of content. So you want to kind of ask yourself, who is your target audience for this kind of content? And then ultimately you want to figure out, well, okay, well, how is the brand going to tie into this content? There's always going to be some kind of a tie for your brand into this content. It's not course, your marketing type content where it's all brand centric. But if you want to really kind of have your content, achieve the goals of why you're creating this, you want to have an idea of how it ties in almost seamlessly, so that you can actually kind of, get them into your conversion funnel or your conversion path or whatever it happens to be, or get them to like your page or your brand or start to follow you through an email newsletter, that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to have to kind of see is like how the brand ties into it all. The next one is identify your content concept. So you've already kind of figured out, okay, well, really I have an objective of why I want to write content. It's because you want to get, say, new customers or new people to sign up for your email newsletter, and that's great. But the next thing is, okay, well, what's the next step? You want to figure out what's kind of your content overall from a content perspective. What's the tone of the content? What's the unique aspect of it? Because undoubtedly there's probably 20 other people out there, 20 other websites that are writing about the exact same topics you are. So you don't want to just regurgitate exactly what everybody else is writing about. You want to give it some kind of a unique aspect, and that's also something that, that is where you figure out how your brand ties into that content. Do you have an interesting perspective on it? Are you kind of more of a, humorous perspective on it? Is it something where you're almost kind of giving warning to people about certain topics? You definitely want to make sure you have kind of a unique selling point to the content that you're creating. And then a big thing is, of course, who's going to write this content? A lot of people are just say, we got to write content, and then have no concept of who's actually going to write this. And it's a big piece these days. Google is promoting authorship like crazy. So when you're talking about who's going to write your content, you want to think about physically who's going to be this person who's going to write your content, but also who is this individual from an online perspective? Do they have an existing kind of, not necessarily a following, but do they write a lot of content already? Do they have a Google Plus page? Do they already have authorship marked up on other websites? You want to figure out who's going to write this content. If it's a new undertaking and you want to kind of, find somebody within the organization to own this, then that's when to make sure you also kind of set up that authorship so that although they may not have it now, the more they write for your brand or for your blog, that you actually do have somebody who can actually build that value. Authorship is key these days when it comes to authoring content. The next item I say needs to be part of your plan is to really, give your content a home. This kind of goes back to the first one when I say is don't just say, oh, we need to create a blog. In some cases, having a quote-unquote a blog, say like a WordPress install blog, might be the easiest from an implementation perspective, but it may not be the best direction to go based on the current structure of your website. In some cases I've seen where you've got categories that are based on some of the products that you have, and then you go and create a separate blog that have the exact same categories that exist on your website. So you're almost kind of duplicating that a little bit. I always say is try to find, how you can integrate this content within your existing structures. That might mean just basically having a section under your, blue widgets category that has, kind of ongoing content that you add, whether it's white papers or if it's kind of industry news about blue widgets, for example. Always see how you can integrate this content within your existing structures, because that's just going to help reinforce the whole instead of kind of having to start new with the blog and kind of take people away from where you ultimately want them to be, which is within the product section or the service section, or where you're really talking about your brand. Definitely try to see where you can integrate this new content into your existing site. You also want to make sure that, okay, well, we're going to have this great content, we're going to have these great writers, but I am going to need some kind of tech resource to help with the implementation of this, even if it does involve kind of just implementing WordPress. You want to make sure that you've got some kind of tech support internally to help you, number one, make sure the content gets up, ongoing content gets up, and if there's anything that kind of happens from a glitch perspective, you've got some help there, because as some of you may know, the writer is not always the developer, and in most cases they're two completely different people. So you want to make sure that from a tech perspective you can get your content implemented within your website in whichever way makes sense for the organization. And then also, like I said, how does this new content kind of interact with your other content? And that's why I said before, you want to kind of see how can you integrate it within your existing structures. If from a tech resource perspective, the only way you can actually get ongoing content added to the site is through a subdomain, so it's blog.website.com. They install WordPress, and that way it's easier for the actual writers to kind of upload and edit and kind of push the content live. You still want to see, well, how do I kind of interact with the other content? Do you want to do cross-linking from a blog post into a specific product page that maybe gives some more details around a specific topic that your product assists with. But you always want to kind of think is how does your content kind of interact with this new content. Ideal scenario is that it all kind of flows together, but like in some cases they do have to kind of live separately based on some tech implementations. The next one is call out the conversion path, and this is a big one because you've already identified your objective is basically to either acquire new customers, get them in, sign up for a newsletter, follow you socially, but whatever it is, you want to make sure that with the content, within the content you create, if it's a new template, for example, within your website, it's obvious to kind of like how to start to push them into that conversion path. It's if they read the content and they like the content, but there's no easy way for them to kind of sign up for the newsletter, to get more information about your product or services, it's really counterproductive. Your content at that point is kind of working against you. You want to figure out how to kind of make this new content work for you. It may involve, if you're able to kind of drive more calls or even more qualified calls to some of this content. And hopefully you have an idea of what the conversion is. If it's a separate goal with some of your content marketing efforts, you definitely want to get a sense of if it's different types of content are more for just lead generation versus this other content is more expected to kind of drive more sales. Definitely have an idea, and I would say based on the type of content, if it's going to be 2 or 3 different types of content that you're writing within your overall content marketing plan, because you can definitely have different types of content. And when I say types, I don't mean either like from media perspective, but I mean in terms of like objectives. You can definitely have different looks and feels, and of course different conversion paths to get them into whatever kind of part of the site, or I guess step closer to being an actual customer. Optimization. This is something where, although Google has definitely changed the way we look at kind of just overall content optimization and just SEO as a whole, there is still value to kind of work with optimizing your content. You need to ask yourself, does the content actually have metadata? Does it have a title tag? Is it unique to that specific page? Some of the traditional elements of content optimization are still alive and well. It's just less about shoving as many keywords into your content and making sure your content is, 1,000 words, and more about kind of making sure you've got those very basic elements that help communicate specific details to the search engine. It's really, like I said, coming down to making sure, does it have a unique title tag? Does it have metadata? Did you do any keyword research more so for kind of to match user intent? Keyword research has definitely changed as well, where before it was kind of just looking to find how people search to find these specific topics and making sure you have a page of content that's completely aligned with that, that specific keyword, so that you can hopefully, rank for a term that has a lot of search volume behind it. Now it's more around kind of user intent. It may not be about finding that highest searched keyword phrase, but more what kind of a keyword that really kind of is more, closely tied to an action you expect or would like these people to do. So if it's more like, buy, blue witches, for example, would be a term you may want to, or how to research, or, you want to find a keyword that kind of matches the intent of either what you want the end user to do, or at least from what that piece of content you're creating answers. And it's something it's about, again, shoving it into your piece of content or all over the page, and more about making sure you just use language that people are kind of more commonly searching for online to find answers to questions they may have. So keyword research is still a component of all of this, but it's more about kind of matching, kind of user intent and, familiarity of terms that people may be searching on. And then ultimately, of course, can your content be found by Google? So many times there's people creating blogs and they forget to uncheck the box in WordPress that basically says, oh, I want my website now to be found. Or they create content that's either from a tech implementation, just can't be found because it's buried within the website. You still want to make sure this content that you're creating, that you've spent all this time creating, a strategy around finding writers to do and establish an authorship, make sure it can be found by Google, because of course if you're spending all this time and effort and money to do it and it just can't be found online, then it's counterproductive to actually create this content. So want to optimization, you definitely want to make sure you kind of check the box and make sure it's title tags, metadata. Take a look and see how people search for the topic you're writing about, just to kind of match user intent. And then ultimately make sure your content, as well as your entire website, can be crawled and found. Separate budget specifically for your content marketing efforts. It can be inclusive of maybe some micro campaigns through Google AdWords. It can be leveraging other resources. I know Outbrain is an example of one product that people tend to use these days to kind of push some of the this type of content out to reach a large audience. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of spend a couple dollars to get a little bit more eyeballs for this new content. I personally think that you do need to have a specific budget set aside to and kind of do an initial push, and it could be an initial push could be a couple months, it could be a year, it could be longer, just depending on where you are in the space. If you're a new brand, you've got a lot of work to kind of number one, build up the trust around what you are in that market, and then also kind of increase the awareness. So it's going to be something where just because you're writing content doesn't mean that people are going to automatically follow you. You have a marketing plan, and maybe something that ties more into your existing marketing plan, where if you have an existing email newsletter for customers or prospects, you start to mention some of these new content pieces that you're creating. If you have a great infographic you're creating, maybe it's something that's mentioned into a prospect email message that you send out at the beginning of each month. There's a lot of ways you can start to kind of build more awareness for this new content, but it is a big important step is to make sure that you do have a marketing plan for your content marketing efforts. It's kind of the thing that people forget. It's content marketing. So you can create the content, but if you don't market it, you only got half the plan. And then ultimately, how will you continue to promote this new content? That's another thing, is people think, all right, great, we spent some time creating an infographic or, say, like a 3-part video series. That's great, but you've also got new content coming up. How are you going to continue that? So it's definitely not a one-and-done kind of a scenario. You want to make sure you have an ongoing idea in terms of, how are you going to sustain this? How are you going to make sure that you can continue to drive content efforts and promote it in a holistic way? I think it's something that I don't think I mentioned before, but when it comes to your content marketing plan, it's not like, okay, great, I created 5 pieces of content, am I done? No, content marketing is it's an ongoing process. It's something where you basically have an ever-growing editorial calendar. It's like once you're done with 1 month, you're kind of replanning for the next month, and ideally you've got a kind of a year-long editorial calendar that is always kind of just moving ahead. There's obviously seasonality involved with every industry. Just the general holidays, there's always some kind of a tie-in you can do with your brand. And sometimes of the years you need to spend a little bit more to promote this content because there's more to be won. If, for example, if you're kind of an e-commerce site and you want to kind of create some content around just shopping guides for the holidays, I mean, obviously your time of wanting to get a lot of audience, a lot of eyeballs is when people are in the mode to be shopping online. So it's definitely on the holidays. You want to make sure you've got more budget set aside for that. So you definitely want to make sure you have a long, ongoing content marketing plan, but the marketing piece also needs to be there as well to support this content at least for the entire year, if not for multiple years. So there's a couple of pitfalls that I actually recommend that you attempt to avoid, because these are, like I said, kind of the ones that everybody just tends to do. And so I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people tend to kind of like the minute they think content marketing, like, okay, this is exactly what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. It's not the case always. So what I always say is, creating content just for SEO purposes, that's not the case anymore. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you could spin up all this content and overnight have 50,000 new pages. You could spin up all these geo-specific pages. You could basically rewrite everybody else's content, put it on your site, and you'd get some traction on it. So that isn't the case. If you're really thinking first and foremost, well, I'm going to have a content marketing plan because I know I need to create content and really it's just so I can get better SEO traction. You need to think a little bit more holistically. You're gonna miss your goals if you're just thinking of it from an SEO perspective. You want to definitely do everything I said before. Think about the audience. Who's going to read this? What do they want? Is it more male? Is it female? What's the tone? What's even the look and feel of the template of this content? Is it going to be all, article-based content? Is it going to be infographics? Is it a video series? Is it photo galleries? And there's a lot of different things you can do when it comes to creating content, and a lot of media that can be defined as content. But you want to make sure you just don't start writing like the wind. You want to make sure you have a strategy, people who are going to be writing the content, and really start to develop the value that this content has. And I can't stress enough, really, what is the unique point of this content? I mean, I don't know what the statistics are in terms of the number of new websites that are kind of launched on a daily basis, but yeah, the competition is really always growing when it comes to kind of just online content. So you want to make sure you have some kind of a unique view, or at least tie the viewpoint of the content back to who you are as an organization, as a brand. Is it something where you are for a specific new innovation in your industry, or maybe even against it? You may want to, I'd say don't be afraid to have an opinion. For some people, it is kind of a little bit scary in terms of if they haven't done a lot of content marketing in the past to really kind of have an opinion on some of these topics or kind of news events that are happening within an industry. But ultimately, that's what people want to see. That's what people start to follow different blogs and different websites that are generating content, because they have a true opinion that is unique to that brand and also has some value in the space. If you just start to regurgitate everybody else's content because you need to write content and you need to have something called content marketing, and it helps with SEO on some level, you're gonna miss the mark, and it's going to be a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of dollars spent, and you're not going to necessarily see the results you're hoping to. Shoving content into your website, like I said, hey, let's just create a blog. I'm sure a lot of people have come to their marketing director and said, hey, I've got an idea, let's create a blog. Well, no, you need to basically come to them with a full plan. A lot of the times it's more of a conversation. It's typically saying, like, we basically want to start to create content for our current users or current customers or new prospects, or some kind of a target, obviously, that you need to have for justification of writing this content. And you basically need to have an idea of, okay, well, where is it actually going to live within the content? How is it going to fit within the existing, item that is your website? You want to make sure that it doesn't kind of, either stick out like a sore thumb, or it is counterproductive to the content on your website. You make sure you don't actually overlap in terms of topics. You may actually have a page that kind of talks about what is a blue widget, and that's great, and that might be the good kind of just basic evergreen piece of content that you need for that specific topic, but you also want to make sure you don't overlap in terms of create a lot of content which you're already kind of really talking about on your website. So you want to kind of audit your website and say, okay, well, from a general information perspective, what content do I have that's not necessarily product descriptions or true brand-related pieces of content? What are more general information pieces of content that could be a starting off point of some of your content marketing efforts? In some cases, people don't realize the assets that they have. Maybe you're a ball bearings company and you've got all these interesting photographs of ball bearings in an artistic way, for example, and they were taken for one reason or another, maybe just for wall art within your actual office. That's some interesting stuff you can push out there, and people might love it and be like, oh, this is great content. This is awesome. This stuff to share it, build more awareness for your brand. People may start to link back to your website because you've got an interesting gallery of ball bearing art. And as we all know, links are still a piece of the Google algorithm, so it's a definite secondary benefit to the overall kind of content marketing efforts, is that there is that SEO benefit to people either mentioning your brand out there or just linking back to your website because you've just got great content that justifies people kind of vouching for you and kind of wanting to kind of share to the world that you actually have great content. But you definitely have to have a lot of these things in place first. And you want to know where this content is going to live, how is it going to benefit the site as a whole, and make sure that it's not just something that's shoved into your website and is obviously just shoved into your website. You can definitely tell when somebody's, obviously went to their boss and said, hey, let's create a blog, or let's just start, Google needs to see content on an updated basis, daily ideals, they make daily content of what they need. Next thing you know, there's just some weird kind of sidebar thing that has all these random articles that are being generated that really have no direction or no true voice or point of view. So it's kind of obvious to see when people have kind of just started to run with content and start shoving it into their website. You definitely want to avoid that pitfall. And then the other one is people just expecting the content to naturally drive sales and traffic. So even if you do your homework and you do the research to figure out who your target audience is and where this content is going to live and who's going to support it from a tech perspective and also from an authorship perspective, and you've got all these great ideas and you've got a calendar and you're doing a mix of different kind of content media and you're writing all this stuff and it's great. You're actually getting traffic to these specific pages, but it's not necessarily going to quote-unquote convert. And that's what I was going back to saying, is you need to have a clear path to conversion within your content marketing plan. Typically this content, of course, is a little bit less markety in terms of kind of really promoting the brand. So you do need to be a little bit creative in terms of how to kind of get them into that funnel. Like I said, it could be just mentioning a phone number for calling for questions. It could be a simple email newsletter sign up. You might even need to create a new kind of a kind of conversion if maybe you need to start creating a email newsletter, which is definitely one way to continue to promote your content and can be key to your content marketing efforts. Maybe it's just getting them to share your content. There's a lot of different things, but you need to think about what is the end goal for this content. Traffic is definitely one thing, but what are you doing with that traffic? If it's something where you want to basically kind of get people to buy, sometimes it takes a little longer from people doing general research that may be finding your new content from a research perspective. They may not immediately, result in a sale. So that's why I say you might want to kind of create some kind of intermediary step to kind of get them into some kind of a funnel, some kind of a lead capture, so you can at least start to market to them in your more traditional ways. So that's basically it. I think, like I said, overall, content marketing, it basically has a lot of different ways to it. It looks different from industry to industry. It can be hype if you make it that way, and I think that's what I have this closing kind of quote here is basically a lot of content marketing can be hyped because a lot of people just make it that way. They don't really know how to kind of approach content marketing. They just hear this word and they run with it, and then they say, well, what happened? Nothing happened. They only give it 3 months, and next thing you know, they abandon the whole thing. Content marketing can work. It can help from an SEO perspective. It's the new way to kind of build your brand, kind of increase your overall value in the online space in terms of kind of building backlinks and just increasing content to your website. A lot of the traditional elements that Google has seen or kind of defined in terms of what they look at in terms of establishing relevance and authority online, it's just in a more traditional sense. SEO has definitely gone more traditional marketing these days in terms of the right way to kind of approach building an audience, increasing your overall relevancy online and the overall topics that you may be wanting to really get traction and get traffic from online. You want to make sure you have a plan around it that's not just about, all right, I got to go buy backlinks, all right, I got to go and write a bunch of content, I've got to write 100 words of or 100 pieces of content. You definitely want to take a more traditional approach to it, where a lot of it's tying into your kind of PR efforts, and sometimes it's even tying into your offline efforts. Sometimes you want to kind of promote the fact that you have a new section on your site with this great content, and you promote the blog through some print. It's not typically something you would maybe do primarily in terms of have a piece of direct mail that's just promoting your blog, but it may be a secondary mention on another piece of content where people can actually just start to increase direct traffic. Of course, it doesn't necessarily start with organic traffic, but at the same time, building awareness oftentimes is kind of just building awareness for the brand, getting people to your site, and then from there, kind of increasing the overall value of your site through content, because basically you've got a lot of great content that people want to read, and then they share, and the next thing you know, it kind of works for itself. You're just continuing to write great content. People want that content. They want to see that email newsletter that has that new article, or they want to see what your point of view is specifically on some of the the events or kind of happenings in your specific industry. So content marketing can definitely work for you. You need to have a plan. If you don't, it could ultimately just become hype and a lot of spent dollars and time with no actual return on investment.
Awesome, David. Good stuff. Sorry, I couldn't get my phone unmuted, so I apologize for the little delay there. So we've got a few questions coming in. If you've got a moment to answer some questions for 10, 15 minutes, David, does that work?
Sure.
Awesome. So first question, and this is a question that I think everybody asks about content marketing. It's like, okay, I can, and we'll talk more about the creation of content in a moment, but in terms of distributing content, you talked about a few tactics, but it seems like distribution of content is the biggest problem. Like people feel sometimes like they're producing this content, writing or whatever, into sort of a black hole that nobody ever sees. Any sort of general strategies or even specific tactics on distribution that you could share with us, or maybe areas where people that are doing it wrong, or however you want to frame it?
Sure, and I agree. I mean, that is definitely the biggest kind of issue, because they may have all the ability to actually create a lot of great content, but actually getting it to be seen and pushing it out to the people that you want to can be a little bit tough. I think the bottom line is, of course, you want to make sure that you have social profiles tied into the blog in terms of being able to kind of push this content. If it is a blog or kind of just being able to push this new content to your followers online, the people who are already following you as a brand, that may not entail actually having to have both a Twitter following or a Twitter profile or a Facebook profile or a Pinterest profile. It definitely kind of ties more back into who is your target audience and where do they tend to socialize online. Maybe they may be more Twitter-based, it may be more Pinterest if it's something where the majority of your content is kind of image-based content, then you absolutely want to kind of make sure you've got a Pinterest profile. That's the easiest way to start to get that content out there off of your site and into the eyeballs that you definitely want to have this content in front of. But in terms of kind of generating new followers or just new traffic to the site, a lot of the times it does start with some kind of a paid campaign. It may involve, actually making, like I said before, kind of a micro campaign or a smaller campaign with Google AdWords, where you're kind of specifically trying to target select pieces of content that you know are great pieces that you feel will resonate well with people, and they just need to kind of see it. So if you create a great 3-part video series, you may want to spend a couple dollars to really kind of try to drive some paid traffic to that, just to build awareness. But there's also a lot of other sites out there that allow for a little bit more visibility through paid means. I know this is a site that doesn't necessarily blend well with all brands or all industries, but I know Reddit has some kind of paid visibility opportunities where same thing, it's like I think it's a pay-per-click. It tends to be fairly affordable kind of to what AdWords can be, but I know there's some paid stumble upon opportunities as well. Like I mentioned, Outbrain is a way that a lot of people are using. There's a couple other different platforms similar to Outbrain where it's basically there's like websites agree to kind of have this widget within their site, and it actually is an opportunity for you guys to kind of push this content, so it actually kind of is promoted on other people's websites. No direct SEO value, but like I said, it's really just a way to kind of get visibility around it. And then finally, I think an email newsletter, honestly, if it's something where you have prospects or you've got basically a list of leads and they've got email addresses, which is, I'm sure, for the most part, a lot of your leads do have email addresses. Email marketing is something that it still has some legs to it if it's done, appropriately. You don't want to just start, again, like I said before, you don't want to shove content into your website. You definitely don't want to shove emails at your prospects. You want to have kind of a strategy separate for that as well. But that's definitely one way to start building awareness, is kind of leverage the people who are already either tied into your brand or given you a lead before, because they may be people who are like, oh, this is great content, maybe introduce them or kind of breathe more life into those leads, and it could also help with kind of referral in terms of they may start talking to other friends about this great content you're providing, or they may just share it on their own social profile. So it's definitely all about kind of pushing it out there, and like I was saying before, looking at some of your paid options is definitely one way to at least start to get some eyeballs at this content.
Yeah, I think you're right there in terms of the avenues for paid. The other question that a lot of people ask is, and you touched on this a little bit, but the actual SEO benefits of social sharing and content. It seems like we're hearing more and more that people sharing content on Google+, on Facebook, etc., actually impacts SEO pretty dramatically. A, do you see that, and B, how do we? I guess it's just a matter of creating good content that people want to share. But is that true, and how do we get people to share that stuff?
It's a good point, good question there. Yeah, it's still to kind of go with what Google's definition is of kind of like how do you optimize a website. It's basically they say, write great content and they will come, but it is kind of leveraging social in a way, and it is also having kind of those secondary SEO elements kind of tied into your content. A lot of how we kind of talk about SEO is more leveraging traditional marketing from an online perspective, even from an offline perspective, but also tying in those specific kind of like hooks that have some secondary value to it. So for example, if you're pushing out a piece of content, having kind of strategic links to specific parts of your website that you're wanting to actually kind of promote or kind of drive more visibility around. So if you have a great article that's talking about blue widgets, you want to make sure you actually do link back to your specific blue widget category where you're obviously talking about your specific product. If that's a page that ends up starting to get a lot of value, a lot of visibility, you can get a lot of value, link value pushed back that way. Specific to Google+, it's one of those things where it is almost necessary to actually have your content pushed through Google+, because obviously that's Google's social profile. So people say it's much more than just a social network. And that's where it comes back to really authorship. The more you can kind of associate authorship with your content, the easier it's to kind of tie it in within the larger Google+, kind of area. And you do, it's one of those things where you always want to kind of find out where your audience kind of, like I said, interacts or communicates online, whether it's kind of Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, or maybe Google+. But even if it's not Google+, you still want to have it pushed through Google+, because, like I said, that's kind of more tied into Google as a search engine, and they definitely reward people that have authorship associated with their content, because you get a better SERP view, and the thought around authorship is basically they're really using, or they're going to probably start to use that to get a sense of, from an individual, not necessarily from a website perspective, but from an individual perspective, who are the authorities online within specific topics, and what's the content associated with those people that are better candidates to rank for specific search words because they're associated with an authority online. So it's definitely crucial to leverage Google+ as much as possible. But yeah, in terms of kind of like how does it really help from an SEO perspective, it's really making sure, like I said, that you've got title tags and descriptions, and your content, number one, has content that can be crawled and identified and indexed and is unique to your site, and also has some of those kind of hooks where it's like if you want to be able to kind of like pass some value within your site that you're strategically kind of interlinking together, and then even if you're pushing content offline, to make sure that you do have the appropriate links back to your website.
That's awesome. Makes a lot of sense. The other question with content marketing that we've asked a lot in our company, for example, and then I know a lot of people are asking today is, as you create, what's the best way to put it? As you create useful content, how long? I mean, how do you measure success? I guess ultimately with content marketing, do you see this as is it a traffic game? Is it a shares? Is it a how do you gauge whether your content marketing efforts have been successful or not?
That's a very good question, and it's really going to differ, because I think for some people, they don't really care about social shares or followers on Facebook or Twitter, because for them it's just not a channel where they can get a lot of sales. I mean, ultimately, I think the end game is that people either want more traffic to the website, or they want more sales, because some people say like, well, I just want more traffic because I know I've got a lot of ad buys and stuff, so I get paid based on page views. Some people are like, well, traffic's great, but if it doesn't actually result in sales, then I don't really want anything to do with that traffic. So it is going to be different based on your company, based on your industry. So I would say, yeah, it definitely varies. but you definitely need to have an idea of what you as an individual, as a really, ultimately want to take time. It does take a lot of effort, and ultimately it takes money. So you want to make sure that if you're going to spend the money, that it's going to be something that you do see a return on investment. Now, I can tell you, just based on kind of just the experience I've had in the past with content marketing, is that it's more difficult to leverage content marketing to result in a sale of a product. It's more successful in terms of kind of introducing your brand to new people, getting them to at least kind of become a lead before they become an actual customer. And even, like I said, it might be kind of creating micro conversions in terms of, all right, well, first I want to make sure that they at least like my content or start to follow me from a social perspective. And then once you've got them to follow you, then you can start to push specific content to people within specific social channels. So it's those KPIs are definitely going to be different, but I think the one piece of advice I could give is, you might want to have some micro conversions, and although ultimately you don't want to kind of make money through your content marketing, it may be a couple steps in the middle to actually get the people you acquire through your content marketing efforts to become true customers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. It does depend on what people are trying to accomplish with their content marketing. Well, awesome. That's great stuff, David. What last words before we close do you have for people? Maybe as they're starting, or maybe they've been doing content marketing for some time and they're not seeing results yet. I mean, give us some encouragement or final words of advice before we conclude.
Well, I think one thing that I can leave everybody with is, let me think here. Well, one thing I really didn't touch on that I think makes a lot of sense, and I think actually is the reason why I'm even here at this, today giving this presentation, is partnering. Partnerships are a great way to either generate content, to kind of make connections in terms of where you can at least start to kind of get ideas for content. It could be a way that you can start to push content. I mean, ultimately, this is a webinar that we created that, basically the search agency can at least kind of benefit from, as well as a lot of my calls. So partnering to find the right way to kind of generate content is definitely an opportunity you may want to look into. So because a lot of people are like, well, shoot, I'm like a three-man shop. I've got nobody in-house I can really truly say is going to be able to write me some great content. Don't be afraid to look out there and see, well, who's out there that's, of course, not a direct competitor, but in the same space that I can be like, hey, we probably do some joint white papers or just some joint content efforts. It's definitely a benefit to be had for both people involved. Especially if you're like, say, I want to create a blog, you've come up with that, and you want to kind of have some kind of ongoing content. There's a lot of people out there who either have their own blogs that are basically trying to kind of start off, and you may want to kind of, write some content for them so that you can at least kind of build awareness for your brand. So another thing in terms of partnering would be, when you create content, don't be afraid to create content for maybe another website. It's something where you always want to have your own content going on, but maybe once a month you go and say, well, I want to become like a contributor to this other blog or this other website, because number one, they may already have an existing following that you can definitely benefit from in terms of introducing your brand to. And number two, if you're writing content, ultimately you want to make sure that you can also promote your own brand within that, so that ultimately results in, of course, at least a backlink back to your website. So definitely don't be afraid to look outside of just creating content for your own website. You want to kind of see what partnerships can you leverage to get either them to generate content for you, because ultimately if you have somebody who's going to be creating content for you, they probably have a following. They can push it out for you. It's how do you kind of tap into other networks, get your content to be pushed out there as far as possible. So don't live in a bubble in terms of I need to write all the content, I'm just going to push it through my social channels and send an email out. Look at partnerships. I mean, it's something you never know what can actually come with partnering with another website in terms of increasing your overall audience and ultimately getting your content to have longer legs than you would ever happen, or would ever have if you didn't actually make these types of partnerships.
Perfect. That makes sense. David, thank you for your wisdom and your time today. We appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for attending. As usual, this webinar is being recorded, and we're going to send out an email tomorrow morning that will have the webinar recording associated with it, so you can log in, or not even log in. You can actually just click on the link, and the recording will start. So it requires no form fill out or anything, so feel free to share that on social media far and wide. Again, we have a couple webinars next week. We encourage you to attend them. We're going to take a couple weeks off for Labor Day. Can't believe we're already at Labor Day nearly. So yeah, we have webinars next week, and then following that, we have a couple weeks where we're not doing webinars. So we encourage you to come to our webinars next week. And David, thank you again. We really appreciate it. I think we met David at SMX West. Does that sound familiar, David?
Yeah, I think it was earlier this year in San Jose. I was actually speaking around content, not necessarily content marketing, but more about, similar about like specifically with content. If you're going to create content, you need to just basically have a plan. So yeah,
that's awesome. So we met David there, and we had heard really good things about the search agency. So we encourage you to check those guys out. And again, David, thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.